During World War II, Fred Korematsu was arrested for defying the order to leave California. He challenged the constitutionality of the order, and his case went all the way to the United States Supreme Court. In a 6-3 decision, the Supreme Court sided with the President's position that during the war, it was appropriate to defer to the military's argument that it was a military necessity to remove Japanese Americans from the West Coast. For decades, Fred Korematsu quietly lived his life with his conviction on his record. In 1981, 35 years after the Supreme Court ruling, top-secret documents were uncovered in dusty archives that showed government lawyers hid information from the courts.
And it was perfectly obvious that nobody had ever opened these boxes since they were initially stored, because they were all dusty. No evidence that anybody had ever untied the string or looked inside. So I decided just to sit down and start going through them, and I picked out the box that said Korematsu versus United States. Almost in the first 5 minutes that I was looking at these records, I found a memo, and in that memo, which was a memo to the Solicitor General who was preparing to argue the Korematsu case before the Supreme Court in 1944. Ennis said, "We are in possession of information that shows that the War Department's report on the internment is a lie. And we have an ethical obligation not to tell a lie to the Supreme Court. And we must decide whether to correct that record." And looking at that document, I still remember vividly thinking, oh my God, this is amazing. This is like a smoking gun. Here's a lawyer for the government about to be in a case about to be argued before the Supreme Court saying we are telling lies to the Supreme Court.
Information uncovered were reports showing the racist beliefs of the military commander who ordered the removal, and evidence that there was no military necessity for a mass removal. Based on this information, Fred Korematsu's conviction of defying the exclusion order was nullified. In addition, Congress formed a commission to look into any possible government wrongdoings. In 1983, the Congressional Commission issued its report and concluded that indeed military necessity was not the cause of the mass imprisonment. Rather, the broad historical causes which shaped these decisions were race prejudice, war hysteria, and a failure of political leadership. Acting upon the recommendations of this commission, Congress passed the Civil Liberties Act of 1988, offering an apology and monetary payment to those incarcerated. President Ronald Reagan signed the act into law, but not before he said these words.
Members of Congress and distinguished guests, my fellow Americans, we gather here today to right a grave wrong. More than 40 years ago, shortly after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, 120,000 persons of Japanese ancestry living in the United States were forcibly removed from their homes and placed in makeshift internment camps. This action was taken without trial, without jury. It was based solely on race, for these 120,000 were Americans of Japanese descent. Yes, the nation was then at war, struggling for its survival, and it's not for us today to pass judgment upon those who may have made mistakes while engaged in that great struggle. Yet we must recognize that the internment of Japanese Americans was just that, a mistake. The legislation that I am about to sign provides for a restitution payment to each of the 60,000 survivors, surviving Japanese Americans, of the 120,000 who were relocated or detained. Yet no payment can make up for those lost years. So what is most important in this bill has less to do with property than with honor. For here we admit a wrong. Here we reaffirm our commitment as a nation to equal justice under the law.
The Civil Liberties Act of 1988 brought legislative closure to the unjust forced removal and incarceration of Japanese Americans. Over 82,000 Japanese Americans received an apology and a $20,000 payment in the years following the signing of this law. For many, the painful memories of the World War II incarceration remain as a reminder of the fragileness of the Constitution and the importance of safeguarding every American's civil liberties.
One of the beauties of the Constitution is that it's a document that applies really without exception. It's not to be applied when it's convenient. It's not to be applied when it's easy. It's really to be applied when it's hard. It's at those times where you have to be least willing to throw away your constitutional rights and really hold yourself as a country to those constitutional rights